Okay, we're gonna try to talk about Tom Reagan's article, "The Case for Animal Rights." Tom Reagan is one of the leading ethicists in America, professor at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Recently passed away, but made a name for himself in the area of animal rights. This book is, in a way, a condensation or summary of a much bigger book called The Case for Animal Rights. And the main problem is the moral problem of animal use. By what right do human beings have the full um, disposal of animals for their own purposes? Reagan will call into question the kind of taken for granted attitude we as a society have in terms of how we treat animal life. And he's also interested in what are the rights of animals. It's something of a norm or something of a habit that over the course of history, human beings have disregarded the rights of animals, or we have attributed rights to some animals that we like our pets, but have been less inclined to extend rights to, let's say, lab rats or insects. But why is that? Why do we actually have that kind of hierarchy, and is it sustainable? Um, and is the harm or killing of animals morally justifiable? Is it morally permissible? Many of us probably eat meat not because we are interested in harming animals or have a desire to harm animals, but because we think it's morally permissible. We actually allow it as part of our habit. And unless one makes a conscious choice to refuse to eat meat or to kill animals, you will inevitably participate um, in what is basically a eat meat eating society. So, is that actually legitimate? Though Reagan will call that into question. Um, on what grounds do animals have rights? Is another question. In other words, if we're going to end up saying animals do have rights, why is that the case? It's not going to be easy enough to simply say that all living things have rights. We actually talked about this in the abortion unit. No one really grants all living things as having rights. The life is quite plentiful on planet Earth. There's all kinds of life that would not really fall under the scope of having inalienable or natural rights. What is it about animals in particular that gives them rights? Is it the fact that for many of them they experience pain? For many of them, if they are kept under bad conditions, they suffer. What gives them rights? That's actually not an obvious question for Reagan. Okay. The book actually also has three broad political goals, and he does not get into very much detail about how to accomplish those goals, but he does think they are possible. The first is the abolition of use of animals in science. Now, this actually sets Tom Reagan apart from a number of advocates for, let's say, the abolition of torture of animals. Um, but could be arguing that if animals were used in a more humane way, that research on lab rats, for example, could produce scientific results that are useful for human beings, could contribute to, let's say, how to cure cancer or some major breakthrough. But Reagan's going to oppose that and advocate for the total abolition of the use of animals in science. And moreover, he's going to oppose the total use of animals in agriculture. So notice he is not merely focusing on the kind of extreme harm that is imposed on animals in the context of factory farming. Um, Rather, even more sustainable practices or more kind of quote unquote natural practices of agriculture, he is going to oppose the killing of animals. And finally, he will oppose the use of hunting as a practice that's legitimate. Hunting often defended as either necessary or natural. Reagan suspects neither necessary nor is it defensible. Um, Now, the key for his first sort of move of argumentation in the book is that what is really a problem about killing animals is not merely a problem of the pain that they experience. So many of us probably, have a kind of revulsion or opposition to keeping a baby calf in a cage for, for veal, for some food we like. It's very easy to kind of be opposed to the use of that type of practice, or we tend to privilege certain animals as protected from us. Dolphins are a famous example, things that are regarded as smarter or somehow more complicated. Um, Reagan doesn't really think that's relevant morally, whether or not the animal is intelligent or sophisticated or complex or resembles human behavior. Uh, the fact of the matter is all animal life has rights. So the abolition of factory farming and the cruelty and torture of animals certainly is wrong and abhorrent, but does not go to the heart of the matter, does not go to the root of the dilemma. So the defense of animal rights he is going to advocate is not based upon the pain experienced by the animal, although many animals do, probably particularly mammals, pigs and cows feel pain. It's very observable. Um, but even if we were to be able to find a way to kill animals without any pain inflicted, it would still be immoral. So we have over time developed, as he calls it, an immoral relationship to animals in general. And that's a very historical and civilizational structure. It's not just that humans, again, like to be bad to animals or like to inflict pain on animals, but we have, for a variety of complex reasons, come to treat animals as resources, as mere things that we can use as we see fit. Probably part of the reason human civilization um, grew and became more complex was that we started cooking meat. Strong argument for that, but now we have developed a level of civilization where it's no longer necessary to cook meat and live off of meat to survive. So therefore, it's no longer defensible. Um, Instead of treating animals as resources, and this is a normative claim, Regan says we should treat them as the subjects of a life. So I want us to think a little bit more about what he means by being a subject and being a subject of a life. So notice he is specifying the category of life. It's not just mere life or the fact of being alive. That's a value. What's a value is that you are a subject. You have a sense of self, perhaps a sense of agency, and he's going to try to sketch out why that endows you with rights. So he's going to give in the book, you'll notice, a number of false approaches to thinking about what is wrong about the use of animals, the killing of animals. And this is a somewhat convoluted way in which he is just unpacking a lot of mainstream ideas that have been in circulation within the animal rights movement that he thinks are confused. Okay, so the first big perspective that has tried to frame the rights of animals is called the indirect duty view. It's a very generic paradigm, and the idea behind the indirect duty view is that humans don't have direct duties to animals. What they have are indirect duties to animals insofar as an animal might be loved or have some kind of attachment to another human. So he goes on to describe a man who perhaps goes over to his neighbor. The guy kicks his neighbor's dog. The wrong within the indirect duty perspective would not be the wrong committed to the dog. The wrong is committed to the neighbor because the neighbor presumably has an affinity with his pet. So the duty is indirect because the harm is done to the human who happens to value the animal. So notice the indirect duty view almost presupposes that the animal's interests are not what is morally relevant when regarding the action. So the obligation within this perspective is rooted in the inherent value, not rooted in the inherent value of the animal. Rather, it's rooted in the inherent value to another human. The animal is a kind of byproduct of that value, right? And so Reagan really dislikes the way in which we're simply still treating animals as simply accidental byproducts of another human's feelings rather than something that might have its own values or rights. And he gets more specific to argue that contractarianism, or the tradition of moral philosophy called contractarianism, still is kind of falling prey to this dilemma or this bad way of thinking about the problem. And the contractarian position is basically social contract theory. It's another, I would argue, name for social contract theory. And what the approach argues is that rights are really the product of voluntary contracts between individuals over what those rights will entail. So rights are not natural, they're not God-given. Rights within the contractarian tradition are the product of contracting individuals. And normally what liberalism asserts within the social contract tradition is that a just society is one in which all humans have the rights of equality and freedom. So rights may be extended indirectly to those who can't contract. We could think of, let's say, for example, children, perhaps people who are mentally disabled, who are not actively involved in the constructing of the social contract, but nevertheless are not disregarded from it. But they only have an indirect relationship to the rights that are produced by that contract. They are not the immediate bearers of those rights. Now, what's wrong with that story? For Regan, it's very similar to the problem of the neighbor who kicks his dog, his neighbor's dog, because it doesn't seem to think clearly enough about the intrinsic or inherent value of the dog. It seems to only be focusing on those who are mediated around it. So the first problem is, how do I actually decide who's allowed to contract? It seems to be just a matter of who in society shows up to build this thing we're calling a contract. In Hobbes, it was a story of emerging from the state of nature to contract to build a sovereign. Well, it could very well be the case that a number of types of people are excluded from the terms of that contract. And indeed, that's what Charles Mills argued very forcefully for in the story of the racial contract, that historically the social contract is really a white contract, excluding non-whites from the rights that are codified within it. So contractarianism can and often does lead to discrimination. And of course, the direction he's taking this is that animals historically have been excluded from the rights that have been articulated in all human social contracts, and therefore it's an inadequate approach. Another inadequate approach is what he calls the cruelty-kindness view. The cruelty-kindness view is a very straightforward moral kind of compass, which simply is attenuating the tradition of virtue ethics to claim that human beings have a direct duty to be kind, and alternatively a direct duty to not be cruel. So these seem to be pretty black and white moral precepts. But Regan is going to argue that there's actually a problem within the cruelty-kindness perspective, particularly as it comes to the treatment of animals. The first problem is that kindness is not equivalent to rightness, or kindness is not the same thing as justice. Why is that the case? Well, you could have a kind intention within a particular action that does not actually respond to or resolve institutions that are illegitimate or unjust. So, for example, you could be a slave owner who is acting with perfect kindness to your slaves, and treats them well, keeps them fed and taken care of, but that would in no way impinge upon the context of injustice that is slavery, which is an institution that is more powerful and more mediated than the intentions of kindness that that individual might have. Okay, so kindness is too kind of individualistic and too subjective a perspective. Similarly, the problem of cruelty applies too. The absence of cruelty is not the same thing as rightness or justice either. Why is that true? Well, you can have an action that is free from cruelty or harm, but still be wrong, particularly if it is carried out within the context of an institutional setting that is illegitimate. And moreover, cruelty might actually be just within certain contexts. It's often argued that within the context of criminal law, um, if a criminal requires punishment, the just solution would in fact entail a certain amount of cruelty insofar as that person is imprisoned, but within the standards of justice, cruelty would be legitimate. Uh, Moreover, on the question of abortion, Reagan refers to this as a possible practice that you could regard as illegitimate or immoral. He's not taking a stand one way or the other, but it could be argued that abortion is an illegitimate or immoral practice, but an abortion doctor uh, could very well be performing his work without any particular cruelty. He or she might just be working out of a vocational sense of obligation. The problem could extend to irresponsible consumption. I could be a perfectly nice person buying goods that contribute to, let's say, less than humane working conditions in the third world, but the absence of my cruelty does not have any impact whatever on the illegitimacy of that relationship. Moreover, pollution, I could be a perfectly kind person polluting all the time by driving. So cruelty and kindness are too narrow and too individual a perspective. What about utilitarianism? Reagan actually has ambivalent things to say about the utilitarian tradition. So remember that utilitarianism adopts a consequentialist approach to moral decision making, arguing that we should think about the likely consequences of an action. And it's premised upon two fundamental principles, at least as Reagan understands it. The first is a sense of equality. And the reason why utilitarianism is oriented towards equality is that it treats the utility or pleasure of every entity, of every living thing, as equal. So my utility is no more important than your utility. And this is the side of utilitarianism that Reagan admires and likes. There's a real egalitarianism about utilitarianism, which he finds useful and which could be thought of as a productive approach to the solution to animal rights. Peter Singer, in fact, adopts a utilitarian approach to animal rights. And also remember that utility also has a kind of use value meaning, that what is useful has utility, and therefore what is ethical is to maximize the usefulness of decisions for everyone. So those are some foundational approaches to utilitarianism. Again, Reagan in favor of the egalitarian part of it, but there's going to be problems with utilitarianism too. Again, utilitarianism will return us to the problem of thinking about animal use in terms of the pain or pleasure we think they might be experiencing. Now, why is that a problem? Why is that not the way to go about thinking about this topic? Well, the problem with it is that it seems to put more emphasis or value on how much pleasure an individual is feeling rather than the intrinsic value of the individual. So in other words, he writes, what has value for the utilitarian is the satisfaction of an individual's interests, not the individual whose interests they are. In other words, it seems to sideline the question of why it is I as an individual have rights in the name of thinking about the possible pleasure or pain I am experiencing. And so too, when we think about animals, utilitarianism would only think about the possible pain or pleasure, let's say a pig or a cow is experiencing under conditions of farming, but would not at all think about what it is that grants that animal rights to begin with. So it seems to still be stuck in this kind of instrumental relationship to animals. It does not resolve the instrumental relationship to animals that humans have built. It only kind of plays around within that relationship. So it treats animals and living things as instruments of possible pleasure or possible pain, but it does not think through in a serious way the inherent rights of animals. And so therefore utilitarianism is kind of doomed from the outset to getting us out of this dilemma. Um, the moral responsibility view we talked about in the context of abortion, but this perspective argues that rights are only inherent in humans with responsibilities. In other words, it argues that if you don't have responsibilities to others, you can't be said to have rights. So it would be difficult for many of us to imagine what responsibilities, let's say, bees have to society. They seem to maybe have responsibilities to each other just to survive, but therefore we wouldn't uh, grant them rights. So animals don't have responsibilities within this approach, and so therefore they don't have the same rights. That's actually an argument that many people advocate for uh, defending the use of animals, or at least making morally permissible the killing of animals, the moral responsibility view. So rights are somehow seen as the outcome of self-awareness or participation in some kind of community. But Regan doesn't think that this is actually much of a solution to the question of inherent rights. The problem with this view is that even if we think about human beings, we see pretty clearly that there are some humans who don't seem to have responsibilities either. Should children, disabled, and others who are perhaps less capable not have the same rights as a mature adult? In other words, it would be kind of absurd to argue that a person who is mentally disabled no longer has rights simply because he or she no longer is capable of having responsibilities. We would not defend the harm inflicted upon such a person in the absence of their responsibility to others. So, what does responsibility have to do with rights exactly? Reagan thinks not very much. This is kind of a contrivance that is used to defend the killing of animals, but doesn't actually explain why. So instead of these approaches, Reagan advocates for what he calls the inherent rights view. In other words, he's going to be thinking about the inherent rights of animals, not indirect rights, not contracted rights, but intrinsic or inherent rights. The fundamental wrong is not the pain of the animal, but the denial by humans of their inherent rights. So, what do we mean by an inherent right as opposed to, let's say, an indirect right? Um, the key to what it is that authorizes or grants you inherent right is subjectivity, being the experiencing subject of a life. But what does it mean to be the subject of a life? Reagan tries to get a little more specific towards the end of the chapter. Consciousness seems to be a pretty big aspect of subjectivity. By consciousness, we mean the fact of having an inner mental life, of having experiences, of having a sense of perception of oneself and one's outside world. Um, the fact of having preferences about one's life seems to be a pretty key aspect of subjectivity. So even in a, let's say, unsophisticated or not very rational animal, um, even if is not capable of building a social contract or doing philosophy, well, that animal clearly has preferences, and the preferences usually tend towards wanting to survive rather than die. So there is a subject there. There is a something there with a sense of self. And then, of course, the experience of pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure are really properties of consciousness. They are properties of mind. And when we do damage to one's experience, we are, in fact, doing damage to one's subjectivity. And lastly, maybe most importantly, is the category of autonomy. By autonomy, we mean self-governing, self-determining. Living things have autonomy insofar as they don't require human intervention to live. So many species on Earth are perfectly fine to exist within the ecosystem without human interference. When we kill animals, we in effect stampede on that autonomy as something outside them. So that's really uh, the bedrock principles of what grants a living thing right. So subjects have rights because they have preferences. They have a preference to not be killed by humans, in particular. The preferences of animals is more important than whatever utility we might get out of using them, even if we find that the experimentation on animals produces positive scientific results. Well, it's still not morally legitimate. That's a very utilitarian perspective in which the ends are justifying the means, um, Reagan does not believe that the ends justify the means. He believes that there is something inalienable about the rights of all subjects. So he writes, "My value as an individual is independent of my usefulness to you. Yours is not dependent on your usefulness to me." This is actually very Kantian language, you might notice. In a way, he is saying we should treat each other as ends in themselves and never as mere means. Uh, while Kant never bothered about animals, Reagan is in a way extending that imperative to animal life. So, just to wrap things up with one important quotation from the book, where each of us the experiencing subjects of a life, a conscious creature having an individual welfare that has importance to us, whatever our usefulness to others. We want and prefer things, believe and feel things, recall and expect things. So, what authorizes or what grants right is subjectivity or consciousness, and that is more morally important, more morally valuable than utility. So, in a way, I would suggest you interpret Reagan as expanding the scope of deontology to animal life as something that has inalienable rights, as something that is a subject. Um, Now, Reagan has been criticized a little bit from some within the animal rights movement for being too anthropomorphic in his estimation of what is valuable about animals, that is, emphasizing too much the side of consciousness and awareness and perception. There's probably plenty of animal life that really doesn't have consciousness in the sense that we're talking about. The type of consciousness he's describing is often very human-like, but nevertheless, uh, he believes the core aspect of what is valuable about life is subjectivity. And so inevitably, he's going to end up making a defense about subjectivity that, in effect, resembles human subjectivity on some level, since we can't really get out of human subjectivity. Uh, so that's pretty much the crux of Tom Reagan's The Defense of Animal Rights. There are other issues having to do with how he wants to accomplish the abolition of animal killing. Um, but the key for you is to think about the inherent rights view and why the other perspectives, such as the indirect duties view and utilitarianism, are wrong, why they're inadequate to the problem.